Welcome to the One Player Podcast, the show on Hallertau board games. I'm your host Albert, and this is episode 349.
The hills are alive with the sounds of music.
I don't think I exactly get your reference, Julius.
Have you seen the box cover? Just look at that box cover. There's hills out there.
Oh, okay. That's true, isn't it? Okay, yeah, today we're talking about Hallertau, folks, and it's a game with hills. It's a game about hills. But first, though, I'd like to... You remember last week how we finished a contest? I'd forgotten I have a... There's my dog barking, sorry. I'd forgotten I have another contest. One of the listeners, one of the people that entered the contest last time for the last Lighthouse, sent me a copy of Ragemore, a bunch-shot game that they have, and they played it. Said, this game's not really for me, so maybe you could find somebody else that wants it. So we're having another contest for a bunch-shot game. Just like that. So if you want to win Ragemore, this is a game that I enjoy a lot, personally. Actually, if you go look at BGG, according to BGG, I have played the game more than anybody else. And it's something I try and keep doing. So if anybody gets close to me, I'll just keep playing and keep raising my play count. Because, I don't know, just, it's a game. But yeah, so it's a neat little game. It's basically you have a tableau of cards, and you're trying to defeat monsters, trying to manage your tableau, trying to win. If you want to win the game, I guess you should send me an email or a geek mail, same as last time. I don't think you need to tell me about lighthouses. I don't know. Tell me about something, anything, and you'll be entered in the contest. How's that sound?
Enticing.
Doesn't it? So yeah, send me your entries, and like the last one, it resolved kind of slowly because we record a week ahead. So when you hear this, we recorded this a week and a half ago. I got to give you another week to hear it and submit entries, and then it's gonna be like 3 weeks before this is resolved again because of that timing. So anyway, yeah, submit your entries and get in the contest. All right. Oh. I got COVID. I had no idea. I know it's rambling, but I've got COVID. I found out. My wife said, "Take a test." I said, "I don't feel bad. It's just a little bit of coughing." Apparently, it's a COVID, but it's very light. I don't feel unwell other than the coughing.
Well, I wish you were Shlema. That means a speedy and full healing.
Ah, thank you. Yes, definitely. Then I appreciate it. Anyway. On to today's show, Hallertau. This is a game by Uwe Rosenberg. It's a farming game. It's about farming in...
Everyone is shocked when you put those two things together. A farming game by Uwe Rosenberg.
What? Never. Yeah, it's a farming game in the Hallertau region of Germany. Is it of Bavaria? Maybe? I don't know. And apparently it's a region known for growing the hops for making beer, so people thought it was a beer game. But it's not. No beer in this game, really. It's crops. It's all crops. So it's a worker placement game. It's about farming and growing a village. Your goal in this game is to grow your village as big as possible, and that's how you're going to get points. I wrote in my notes, 1850s Bavaria. So it is in Bavaria. So there we go. This game does have a fair bit of components. It's an Uwe Rosenberg game about farming, so therefore it has to have a lot of components. let me go through. There's 10 decks of cards in this game.
10?
Excuse me, yeah. 10 different decks. You don't use them all. There's a deck for there's a bonus cards, bonus point cards. There's regular point cards, there's gateway cards, and farmyard cards. Those are 4 different decks, but the gateway cards and the farmyard cards, they're 4 decks of each. When you play, you're going to use one of those 4 decks. So there's a variety from game to game.
Is it easy to tell the difference between the various decks?
At first, I thought it was hard because the image for each deck is a little different on the back. Like the gateway card has a picture of a house behind a gate, and the gate looks a little different on each picture. The simpler deck has a very simple up and down gate. The more complex gates have more ornate patterns on them. So I thought that was kind of hard at first. But when you flip it over, they're numbered, and each series is 100 off. So like 100 would be the easy, 200, and 300, and 400. And after that, the next set is 5 through 800. So it is easy enough to tell them apart when you're playing. You're not likely to get them mixed up, though it has happened to me where when I finished the game and I sorted out the cards back into their own separate piles, I missed one or two, and they got stuck in a communal deck, in a different deck. And later on when I was playing, that one somehow got shuffled back in and ended up in the wrong of the gateway decks. But again, using numbers...
Still sounds like it'd be so much easier and better if they had the different decks look distinctly different.
Yeah, that would help.
Look different.
Yeah, and I mean, and you, like I said, the pictures are different. So if you set them next to each other, it is obvious. But anyway, so lots of cards. These cards all are important to the game. They're going to give you different things as you're playing. Some, and they're generally the sort of thing where if you spend resources, if you have reached a certain milestone, you're going to be able to get things from that card. And you play the cards as appropriate. And I'll get a little more into that later, but not too much probably. There's also 6 quadrant cards. They're used in any game less than 4 players, because when you're playing solo or 2 or 3 players, as you're playing, you need to remove cubes from the board. If you're playing less than 4, then you have to choose which region of the board, which quadrant of the board you're removing those cubes. And so that's just there to kind of randomize that for you. And then there's a lot of wooden resources. There's 10 different types of resources. There's hops. I'm not going to get them all right. Wheat, maybe barley. There's sheep. There's yarn. There's milk. There's meat. Other stuff. There is boards. There's multiple boards. First is the big action board. And that's the one that I mentioned, quadrants. It's divided into 4 sections. And it has all the different actions you could play in there. It looks kind of complex. Each action has a row with 3 little boxes on it. Below the row with 2, and then below that a row with 1 box. And the way you're going to play the game is if you choose that action, you fill up the lowest available row. So if you're the first person to go there, it costs you 1 worker. If you go to the second person, it's going to have to spend 2 workers to get to do that same action. And so on. There's player field boards. Okay, the rest of these, each player has their own sets. There's a field board, which shows all the space for all the fields that you have and spaces for all the resources that you own for managing it. It's a little more streamlined than, say, Agricola. This game reminds me a lot of Agricola in some ways because of the decks of cards and the fact that you're farming. But in Agricola, you start getting resources. You have lots and lots of resources, and then sometimes you get a 5 times marker, so you could mark when you have 5 of a resource. This one just has a little track, so that as you increase the number of resources you have, you just move up and down the track. And if you get to 5 and you need more, then you would add a second.
Similar to Caverna Cave versus Cave.
Okay, yeah. So I like that. I also find it a little crowded, but overall I liked it better. There are...
Also similar to Cave versus Cave.
Yeah. Action board, player boards, stable boards, community... Stable boards? Why did I write stable? What is a stable board?
The board where you keep the livestock and things. I mean, it's a stable. It's where there's the sheepies.
I just never referenced it by name before. It's a board where you're actually going to keep all your cards. Well, not all your cards. You're going to get 6 cards, and each round you're going to get to reveal one of the cards. And you're going to place those cards on the board. As you're playing the game, you're also going to gain sheep. Those sheep will also go on the board. On that board. So that's a stable board. There's a community center board, which is this crazy big board that's wide, that has on the right a bunch of grids, and on the left just a big open area with numbers along the top. And then you have the community center building, which is this big cardboard building that you're going to place on the left half of that board, and it has a little window that's open. You can see through that window, and that shows you how many workers you have. As you're playing the game and you're sliding this board to the right, you're going to reveal higher numbers, therefore you're getting more workers that round. It's a neat mechanism. It's kind of fun, but it's also kind of weird how big it is. Just I don't know. It just seems over the top. There's a jewelry box where you can keep how many jewels you've collected that you could use for later on in the game. You could spend them, or they're going to count for extra points. And finally, there's 5 craft buildings and stones. These craft buildings are going to go in the community center board. On the left edge of that grid that I mentioned, it keeps the large community center from moving to the right, because it butts up against those little craft buildings. As you're playing the game, you spend resources. to shift those different craft buildings to the right. Once you shifted all 5 to the right once, you can now move the big community center once to the right, getting yourself more workers the next round. And as you keep doing that throughout the game, again, that building keeps moving to the right. So that's probably all the components. I may have forgotten something because there's a lot in there, but that's what you get in a game of Hallertau. A lot of components. It's pretty easy to set up, even though there's a lot. It brings plenty of little plastic bags. So I've got all the stuff for one player stuck in a bag, and then just all the resources in a couple different bags, and just put them out in a bowl, and I'm ready to play.
I feel like you've kind of mixed together the gameplay and the components.
A little bit. I like to give people an idea of how they're going to be used briefly when I'm talking about the components, so you have more context for later. But you're right. So in terms of what? In terms of Julius.
And I'm sure it happens constantly, but yeah. In terms of just asking about the components, the different indicators for the different things that you said all seems crowded. Is that an issue where it's getting knocked out of place because of it, or it just seems too crowded? Like, is it causing actual issues in the game?
No, it doesn't really cause actual issues in the game. Sometimes I have, you could fit maybe 4 resources in that space. If I need 5 or 6, I'll stack them up, or maybe just line them up along the side. So it's not really an issue. Once or twice I've knocked things around by mistake. That's my own clumsiness, though. And that'll be an issue in any game, I think, where you have a lot of stuff.
And the way you're tracking those buildings is you're moving them left and right. Similar type of question. Are you ever finding issues about those getting in the way of each other or messing that up or anything like that?
No, I have not had trouble with that. That happens at one specific phase in the game, and that's all you're doing is moving those, and you just do one at a time. You'll spend the resources, and then move a building, spend some more of the resources, and move another building, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that part becomes very easy to manage. Yeah. In terms of the art of the components and all that sort of stuff and the readability, it's an Uwe Rosenberg, farming game. Many of these have come out. You kind of know the look already if you've played any of them. It's all very consistent. They're just building on a foundation that really works well. The art is similar. I like it. The iconography and all that sort of stuff is easy enough to understand. No problem, really. The one exception might be some actions you play. They can only be played on certain rounds, or maybe not in a specific round, and that's shown across the top. That happened rarely enough that I didn't realize it. I had to look it up to figure out what the heck it was talking about, and what it meant, because it just wasn't obvious. And that's an issue because of the variety of cards, because you got so many different decks to play with. It just may not come up that often. But overall, yeah, generally, I'm happy with the component, the quality. Like I said, it's an Uwe Rosenberg game. You know exactly what to expect with it.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
How are the rules?
Like I said, it's an Uwe Rosenberg. You know what to expect. I found them clear, easy enough to follow. The game is a bit complex for sure, so it took a little while setting it up and then going through it and understanding it. But it's always explained in a very clear fashion where you have all the steps in order and tells you what to do each step and whatnot. You can always reference the beginning if you're confused about something. What a component is. There's a diagram with all the components and the names. So it's easy to follow. There's 2 books. There's the rule book and the appendix where it tells you. Actually, no, it's on the same rule book, isn't it? It's a list of all the cards and what they mean.
I think it's in the same rule book.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're not sure what the card is, you reference in the rule book. You find that number, and it'll tell you how to use that card. And it's all, again, it's an Uwe Rosenberg game. No problems whatsoever with it.
Perfect.
I wonder why I'm thinking of 2 books.
Just because we've had so many of those.
Yeah, that's true. The theme.
I mean, it's farming.
I think that the farming theme came out well in this one. Yeah, you get stuff. Actually, I do like it a little better than, say, Agricola. There's one change that I really enjoy, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But it has to do with crop rotation.
Well, now I'm intrigued.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about the gameplay. And it's basically the same solo. If you're playing solo, it's the same mechanics as a 2-player game, but you're just trying to see how many points you get. So the game has 10 phases, and they go in order. The most important phase is number 4, really. which is the bulk of the game. I already mentioned you have a number of workers. At the beginning of the game, I think you get 6. And it says in the little window, and you have 6 workers you could place on any of those spaces on that big action board. The board is going to start partially filled up on the bottom row. 3 of the 4 quadrants will have 1 cube in every action. The 4th quadrant, chosen randomly, will have that whole section empty. And as you're playing, if you're playing multiplayer, you go around taking turns, each person doing one action at a time. Or if you're playing solo, just do them all. You choose which action by placing you choose which action you want to do, and either you have to do 1, 2, or 3 workers on it, depending on what's the empty space. I'm having trouble explaining things today, and I'm blaming my COVID. You'll choose your action, and the lowest empty row, that's how many you have to fill that row with cubes. So if it's the lowest row has 1 space, you put in 1 cube. If that space is taken, the lowest one has two little spaces for cubes, so you're gonna put 2 cubes in there. So if that action's already been taken, basically, it's more expensive, and you may want to do something else if you can. The actions they vary from gaining resources. It could be crops. So it might say gain 3 crops, or it might have you gain sheep. It might have you gain clay. They might have you harvest, or they might have you plant fields. They might have you plant fields, and whatever it is you choose. And all these are different ways, basically, to manage your resources. I won't get into all the different types of actions. I already said there's 10 resources, and they all interact a little bit differently. There's multiple ways to do those things. So, like, for example, the planting fields, there's 4 different actions that will let you plant a field, at least 4. One of them lets you plant 4, another one lets you plant 3, 2, and 1, but they all also, some of them also do more stuff too. So if you're only planting 1, it might do something else also. Or if you're planting 4, that's all you get to do. But you're going to go around doing these actions, trying to figure out, trying to use all your workers up and maximize what you're doing, hopefully to get all the resources you can with a large variety, so that later in the game, towards the end of the round, you can now spend your resources to move those craft buildings to the right, letting you enlarge your community center and have more people working. That's the basic flow of the game. There's also the cards I mentioned. As you're playing the game, you could play cards from your hand. You could always play a card when it's appropriate on your turn. The cards generally say things like, if you have 3 sheep, you could play this card. You don't even have to spend the sheep, you just have to have the sheep. And it may give you a yarn or a milk or something else. The combinations of things you need to have to play the card vary a lot. Other cards will tell you spend something to get the benefit. For example, spend the 3 sheep, or actually, I think there's one that says spend 2 sheep and get a free sheep every round for the rest of the game. So that's something that's useful earlier on more so than later on. However, a lot of these cards also give you victory points, and that's important. So yeah, so those cards end up actually being really important because they will give you a lot of victory points in the end. The most points you could get from the board directly is 70, and a winning score in the game, I think it was 100 or 110. So a fair number of it comes from other things, and which would probably be mostly cards. That last phase I mentioned, it's not the one where you're advancing your craft building. That's the other phase that's important to get into details of, where you're spending resources to move your craft buildings to the right to enlarge your community center. What you're doing there is each of the buildings, there's 5 different types, and they have names, but the names are kind of irrelevant. They each have a different cost in how to build that building. One of them might say you got to spend a meat or a milk to advance this building. So what you do is you'd pay that.
I'm laughing at the names being irrelevant because that is obviously not a thematic player.
Yeah, I have never really paid attention to the name whatsoever. Maybe it would help me make sense of how to think about which resources I need for it, but I never think about it.
And I feel like we just talked about Neum recently, where I try and call all the tiles by their names, and
yeah,
sort of bring that more to life. So what you're saying is just anathema to me.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I would. I also say I don't do so well in this game, and maybe if I pay more attention to the theme of it, I might do better. Honestly, because
Yeah.
well, I'll get into this a little more, but when it does get tricky to manage this part. So I was saying you have to spend resources to advance a building, and it'll tell you what type of resources. One of them will say, spend from these two types. You have to spend from that two types. Another one might say, here's two types, but you have to spend more of type A than type B. A third one might say, here's three types. Or here's three types, but only one of them from the third type. So the cost is also different from round to round. On the first round, it's one resource total per craft building. So you need to have, the first building I said has to have milk or meat. You have to have either one milk or one meat to advance that building. The second round, it's now two resources. The third round, it's three resources, but if you spend two different types, then it's only one. And the fourth round, it's four resources. And if you do two types, it's only three. And then the next round, it's, I guess, five resources, and you get a bonuses for having two or three types, and 6 rounds similar. So as the game advances, it's going to be more and more expensive to build those craft buildings. But there's bonuses if you could spend more types of resources. That's why I said earlier, there's benefits to having a lot of variety of resources. So what I found was, as I'm playing this game, I need to plan which resources I'm going to have. I need to think about it carefully. Oh, I want to have a lot of wheat, so I could do this building over here. But I also may need the wheat for that building, unless I could also have hops. Oh, and then over here I'll need milk. And so you kind of got to get a balance of how much you need of everything ahead of time. It's a lot of math to do in your head. So it definitely requires a lot of planning out if you're going to do well in that, I think. I don't like to plan these things out too far in advance, so I probably why I didn't do as well. So that's the gameplay basically. Take your turn spending all these actions, playing cards, playing workers. Go on to the. Well, I should mention some of the other phases a little bit more detail. You're going to gain resources from doing these actions.
There's a lot of phases.
There's 10. So I kind of skipped 8 of them. I think phase 5 is take the card that was on the stable board, and if you want to use it now and you can't use it now, go ahead. So that's the whole phase. It's really, really small. But after that, what happens is, I mentioned that you're harvesting, or you're playing. Well, I cannot think clearly today. I mentioned how you're planting fields, right? The fields are in a large grid that has 4 rows, starting at row 2 up to row 5. When you plant a field, you take one of your resources that you have in your resource pool, and lower it by 1, and then put a matching resource of that type onto the field that you're planting it into. When it's time to harvest, the first thing you do, any fields that you did not plant in and are fallow right now, you raise them up 1 track on that board. Now, any fields that have a resource on them, you slide that resource all the way to the left and put it into your available resource, into your resource pool, and lower the field by 1. So using a field that's at level 4 will gain you 4 of whatever you planted, but the next round it's now only going to be able to do 3, because as you use them, they become less productive. Leaving the field empty for a year will make it more productive that following year, and I really like how that works. That's one of the big ways of getting resources, is planting those fields and getting as much as you can out of them. So hopefully you have them way up there at 5 and plant them, and get 5 resources for that effort of whatever it is you planted. You could add more fields. The more fields you have, the more you could plant. The more things you'll have. So that was like 2 of the actions. You also get milk from all your sheep. Every sheep you have gives you milk. Sheep die of old age after a while. When you get a sheep, you put them on the stable board. If you're on turn 1, there's 2 rows of 3 actions, of 3 spaces on that stable board. So turn 1 is the top row left, turn 2, turn 3 next to it, and then below it is 4, 5, 6. So when you gain a sheep, you put it on the card below your current turn. So if you're on turn 2, you put the sheep on the card of turn 5. When you get to turn 5, that sheep dies. It's an old sheep. That is neat. I like how the resources change over time in this game. How the sheep have a chance of dying, but you could also make them extend their life, but through different actions on the board. I like how the fields get better or worse over time. I like that progress through time that happens in the game. I think it's a really neat mechanism that gives it a nice feel to it, a nice sense of farming.
I will say I very much like that there's sort of an abstraction to fields and to buildings in that, you have a field board where it looks like you're putting out fields and you're loading them up and you're putting stuff on them. Mm-hmm. But in all reality, it's actually abstracted. It's a whole bunch of tracks that are tracking the health of them. And similarly with the board for your buildings, it's not a village board where you're putting all the buildings out. It's a track to show how much you're spending on the buildings and how you're using them and advancing them and how it ties in with the community center and how you can have workers, things like that. Those tracks are all tracks, and it seems intuitive and also nice. I imagine that someone might say, hey, but it looks like I'm actually putting things on a board, making things, and my fields are moving around. Dirt doesn't normally do this. But I don't think I would have an issue with that, and I think I like how easily tracked it is and how it adds additional depth to how those resources are being advanced, how you're moving supplies around. So that sounds very interesting to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think, in my mind, this game is an improvement on, say, in a game like Agricola, where they have made the farming more thematic feeling, I think.
Deep.
A little deeper, yeah. And not in terms of complexity of gameplay, but in terms of the theme, I think. So yeah, that's Hallertau. That's as much as I think I need to get into it. I don't think we care about all the other actions. What this game doesn't have, that Agricola does have, is animals don't make babies automatically. I do like that in Agricola. that having 2 sheep does not get you a 3rd sheep ever. Anyway,
you want the little sheepies.
There are things I like about this game that I want to just mention a little more. The first is the variety of the decks. I always love that sort of thing. Just having so many different decks and playing with them guarantees that the game will be different every time you play. Now, there may be certain ideal ways to play so that you do better. I haven't necessarily figured them out, but I like that the decks introduce some variety, so it's not going to be the same every single time. And you start with 6 cards in your hand, so not tons, but you can get more throughout the game. I did mention there's a couple action spaces, or there's actually 4 of them on the board, that will give you a new action card, or a new card from a associated deck. There's 4 decks in play each game, and 4 places where you could go to get the first player marker, and a new card from that section. Some of the cards also, when you play them, will let you draw more cards. So cards can come up a lot in the game. I think they're like I said, they're a big part of the score. So I really like that variety. I like the action board. I like how you have all these actions and how using actions more than once in a round gets more expensive. And I didn't mention it too much detail, but one of the phases, it is an important part of the game. I think it's like the second phase or so it's early on, and it wouldn't really apply the first round. After the round ends, you're going to draw a card from that quadrant deck of 6 cards, and it can tell you which quadrant to remove cubes from. So you will go to, let's say it tells you quadrant 3, you'll go to quadrant 3, and for each of the actions in that quadrant, you remove the top row of cubes. So if there was only 1 cube in that quadrant, you can remove that 1 cube, and now everybody that does an action there, any action that's done there, only costs 1 cube. If any of those actions were used twice, you'll remove the second row with 2 cubes, and you'll leave the bottom cube. So that action is still kind of expensive. You're not going to spend 2 resources to do that. And which means, unless you don't do that action, it's going to stay expensive. You got to just wait and not do that action and let it get back to empty if you want it to be cheap. Which, of course, is not always going to be a good option. Sometimes you just need to go there because that's what you need. So I do like how that action board clears up and how it keeps staying dynamic.
Very cool.
Yeah. Well, so there's more still.
Anything you didn't particularly like?
The community center board. I cannot decide if I like it or dislike that one. That one it's a really big board, and you slide it to the right, and visually it's attractive, but it feels overly big. and kind of gaudy. I don't know. Not sure I enjoy that as much. I kind of wish maybe it was something smaller, maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know how I feel about it, but that one definitely stands out as different in this game. And it isn't all just fluff. I mean, there is some point to it, right? There's all those spaces on the right where the buildings are on the grid. Moving those buildings to the right, there's boulders that are put in the way, so you cannot advance a single building too far in a round easily. You'd have to use tools. There's a way to get tools in the game. You have to use those tools to move the boulders to advance that building extra. So it's generally hard to move more than one space each round. And all that space is kind of needed for that. But I do like the fields. I do like how I already said this, the fields, how you harvest them and they are less productive the following year, or you leave them fallow and they get better. And yeah, I really like this game. As a matter of fact, having played this game, I said, I don't need that many complex Uwe Rosenberg games. I got rid of Fields of Arl. I said, I don't need both of these. To me, they both kind of fit the same spot. Really complex games with lots of actions and lots of choices to make. The key difference being here, my son would play this one with me, and that other one he didn't seem to care for at all for whatever reason. So I didn't see any reason to keep both. So yeah, it's a game I like.
Sounds amazing then.
So should we reap this podcast? Can you do that?
Sounds like a good plan. All right.
All right, everyone.
Have a good night, Albert. Feel better.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. We love feedback, so we love hearing from you. You can reach me at julius@oneplayerpodcast.com or JLBird on BGG, and Albert can be reached at albert@oneplayerpodcast.com or Fractaloon on BGG. Our website is oneplayerpodcast.com with the number 1, and we're also on Twitter at oneplayerpodcast. The intro music is copyright Angus, can be found at jamendo.com. The transition music is copyright by Dan Elduce Pancaldi, whose page is at donpancaldi.com. The One Player Podcast is protected under a Creative Commons share-alike license. Thanks for listening.